Good afternoon, everyone. Kalispera. Welcome to the webinar State of the Greek PV Market and the Opportunities for Energy Trading. My name is Christian and I'm a project manager at Solarplaza, and with me is my colleague Marco as well. And I'm glad to see that so many industry professionals are joining us this afternoon, almost 150 people already, so that is very good to see. And today we are going to talk about the Greek PV market. This is our webinar program of today. We will be covering topics such as the state and outlook of the Greek markets, the impact and the overview of the tender program, future business models, PPAs, energy trading, and all other trends. And as you can see, our speakers of today are Stelios Psomas from Elapco. He is a policy advisor at Elapco, and also Christos Georgopoulos, who is the CEO at Inexus. So they will give two presentations, and after that we will have a joint Q&A where we can cover the questions from the audience. And before we continue, I would like to briefly introduce Solarplaza to you as well. Our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. And we do that through our events and our newsletters and news portal. And we help renewable energy professionals to become more effective in their business development by providing unique networking opportunities, but also high-level content. And since our inception in 2004, we have organized over 140 events in more than 40 countries already. And since some time also not in physically in countries, but also digitally through our virtual event platform. And this particular webinar is in anticipation of the Solar Future Greece. It will be the third edition of the event, and we are co-organizing it once again with our strategic partner Elapco. And at the conference, we will be exploring business opportunities in the Greek solar PV market, with a diverse group of national and international stakeholders. And we will also offer lots of opportunities for networking and meetings. And we hope to, we aim to be gathering over 150 executives once again. It's a great opportunity to meet with all the regulators, policymakers, key stakeholders, but also network with experienced project developers, investors, and lawyers, and learn about all the relevant topics in the market. And we are currently working hard on setting up an interesting program. And of course, situation with regard to the COVID pandemic is still volatile and sometimes unpredictable. For instance, currently there is a government measure as well in place, which allows a maximum of 50 persons to gather physically. So over the coming period, we will keep monitoring the situation closely. And in a couple of weeks, we will make a decision to host the event either fully physical, as we are planning currently, or to have a hybrid setup with both a physical event and a digital layer, or even organize a fully digital event. So make sure to subscribe for updates via the link on the slides to stay in the loop on this and all other updates of the event regarding the speakers and the program and the attendees. And furthermore, some final practical notes before we begin. It's possible to submit the questions during the entire webinar by typing them in the questions box, and we will try to discuss most of the questions at the end after the presentations. And also, in case you have technical questions, you can use the chat box. And the whole webinar will be recorded as well, and slides will be made available after the webinar. And our first speaker is Stelios Psomas. He's a leading Greek PV consultant, and he's a policy advisor for Elapco. And he has been campaigning for solar PV for a long time already, and was and still is actively involved in the introduction and drafting of PV-related legislation in Greece. So let's continue with the webinar and go to his presentation. Stelios, I hope you are there and that you can unmute yourself. We will also give you the controls, but I believe, if I'm correct, that we will also start off with a nice poll question, but feel free to introduce yourself first.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Today, I will try to give you the status and outlook of the Greek PV market, a market which currently is very vibrant. And considering that we spent almost 5 years of almost zero capacity installed. It's really a surprise even for people with an experience of 20 or 30 years like me in the PV sector. PV is a very hot issue, and as I said before, it seems that we now have a new market development, and this time I'm sure that we learned from the mistakes of the past, and that this development will be continued for many, many years, at least for the current decade. Well, I gave you a key word, which is vibrant. So the first question I would like to ask you and get your opinion on that is, what is your opinion on the next year's PV market in Greece? There are three options for you to answer. Please spend some time to answer this question. And later on, we can discuss why one of these three answers is the correct one. So
Okay,
the three options we have.
I've launched a poll for you, Stelios. Let's see what the audience thinks, and hope that the new wave of solar in Greece will be more sustainable. Yeah, let's collect some responses, and then we can go to the answers in a bit.
Okay.
Okay, so these are the results for now, Stelios.
Okay, we will discuss about these later on, as I will present my story. Can I have control of the presentation now, Christian?
Yeah, I have closed the poll again, and we can go back to your slides.
Okay.
Do you see the slides again, Stelios? If you
I see the slides, but I don't have control yet.
If you click the slides once, I think it should be working. Let's see.
Okay, now it works. Okay.
Perfect.
This is a very brief summary of the presentation. I'm going to give you the status and very, very short history of the Greek PV market. I will explain the current developments, which are very, very interesting these days, and also present the opportunities of the Greek market, and then see how the auction program we have in place so far, how it has helped the development of the market. And of course, just because things are going very, very fast, we need also to see what will happen in the next few years and see what lies beyond auctions. Okay, this is a very brief roadmap of the Greek PV market. We started many years ago. Actually, Greece was one of the first European countries to introduce a feed-in tariff for PV back in 2006. And then 5 years later, we had a market boom, which actually delivered some spectacular results. A very small country managed to be an over 1 gigawatt market at that time, which was quite impressive. However, this has led to a bubble, and then an overheating of the market ended to retroactive cuts and freezing of new projects. So for some years, the market was still. Then in 2016, we had a new legislation introducing auctions, and we had the first pilot tender. 2 years later, auctions became the norm in the Greek market. And in the meantime, costs went down following the international trends. This year, we have a newly introduced legislation which simplifies authorization procedures. And of course, this has created a new interest by investors. While as of next year, we will have in place the so-called EU target model. Greece is probably the last European country to introduce that. And of course, we will have corporate PPAs in place. I will tell you a few words about this, and then my colleague Christos from Inaxis will go into more detail about that. I was talking about some impressive developments a few years ago. In fact, if you see the statistics, Greece is the 8th country when it comes to installed capacity per capita, which is not bad for a small country, considering that in the last many years, the newly installed capacity in Greece was practically zero. So this is the triumph of the past, and we'll see what needs to be done, what is being done in order to recover from this and improve our achievements. Here is the picture of the Greek market, the development of the Greek market in the last 13 years. As you can see, soon after the introduction of the feed-in tariff scheme, we only had 2 megawatts of installed capacity, which started increasing. A few years later, we were over 1 gigawatt, which was practically a world record by that time, when one considers the very few countries at that time had a gigawatt annual market. However, some of you will be familiar with the similar Spanish, let's say, market development. Suddenly the market collapsed, and as you can see, only just last year we started developing again. I can give you a hint that the red bars will start increasing again, and very, very soon we will have a market of many hundreds of megawatts per year for the years to come. But we will explain what at least my guess is for the next couple of years. Why is that? Apart from obviously the favorite regulations, Greece is, as you can realize, a very good place to install PV. Here are some statistics concerning the average energy yield of ground-mounted PV systems all over the country. As you can see, it's the capacity factor is something like 17 point something, which is quite good. And contrary to other countries, like, for example, the Netherlands, in Greece, ground-mounted systems consist the majority of installed systems. Up to 80% of systems are ground-mounted. And although there is a huge potential for rooftop, both in the residential and commercial sectors, this sector is not yet developed as much as we would like to be developed. And of course, we are taking some actions in order to improve this segment of the market as well. And here is the capex trend in Greece. As you can see, it follows international trends. And if you see the exact figures, one can realize that prices in Greece follow more or less the prices in countries like Germany. We have very few differences in capex. And it's only certain that this capex will go down in the years to come. So this will, of course, help the market development. As feed-in tariffs or feed-in premiums or auction prices are going down, this is happening with capex, so return on investment remains quite high, and that explains the huge interest by investors. Having said that, and if you look at the situation of the Greek market, a couple of years ago, the Greek electricity market was dominated by lignite. Actually, lignite produced more than 50% of electricity in Greece a few years ago. And of course, at that time, lignite was the cheapest fuel to burn. However, this has changed completely. Now lignite is the most expensive fuel, at least in the mainland Greece, while the levelized cost of new PV is lower than the levelized cost of both lignite and natural gas, something which was unimaginable a few years ago, but which also explains why there is so much interest and why we expect that the new business models like the energy exchange market and the corporate PPAs will have will make sense in the years to come. Apart from selling electricity to the grid, of course, we need also to see the other segments of the market. Currently, there are two self-consumption schemes. The first one, what we call net metering in Greece, although this term may create some misunderstandings. We do have such a scheme in place, both for residential and commercial applications up to 1 megawatt. And we also have a self-consumption scheme for commercial industrial prosumers, where there is no capacity limit and you can actually sell up to 20% of the produced energy. Very, very soon, I guess by next year, we will also have a self-consumption scheme for the small systems, which will be more or less similar to the commercial industrial prosumer, that is real-time self-consumption. But this is something we still have to see. And just this year, the feed-in tariff scheme has been reintroduced for residential systems up to 6 kilowatts. Although this is not yet active, we're expecting for a ministerial decision which will make it active. But this is going to become live this year, thus reopening a market which was very successful a few years ago. Many dozens of thousands of residential and small commercial systems were installed thanks to a generous feed-in tariff scheme we had for this segment of the market. Now, concerning long-term energy planning, the Greek government has presented less than a year ago the National Energy and Climate Plan, which foresees that the cumulative PV capacity in 2030 will be 7.7 gigawatts. I always say that this figure is a minimum figure. This is at least 7.7 because, as you may know, these national plans are amended every some time. For the next amendment will be 3 years from now. So taking into account the vast interest by investors, my guess is that this national target for PV, especially for PV, will be increased in the next years. Just recently, that is last week, the Greek government has announced that at least 2.3 gigawatts of PV will be installed in lignite fields by 2024, following the decision to phase out lignite. For those who don't know many things about the Greek electricity market, the Greek government has decided to close down all but one lignite power plants by 2023. And the last one, which is still being constructed, will be closed in 2028. In the meantime, as I said before, the feed-in tariff scheme was successful, but then we had to change it. I mean, everything, even good things, have to be replaced when they are not helpful anymore. And during the last 3 years, we have a scheme based on auctions. Up to now, we have 1.3 gigawatt of PV that have been awarded a feed-in premium. And the good news is that PV has achieved the lower prices among all energy technologies. And here you can see the results of these auctions from 2016 onwards to just a couple of months ago when we had the last auction. As you can see, there are different categories for PV systems. Currently, there are these categories have been merged to two: systems below 20 megawatt and systems above 20 megawatt. Systems above 20 megawatt participate in common auctions with wind. And as you can see, PV is always achieving the lower prices compared to wind. So there is a downward trend concerning the feed-in premiums that are awarded to systems, and we expect this to continue. Of course, there are questions for how long the auction system will continue, whether it will be stopped sometime, and this time might be next year or 3 years from now, and what will happen with the parallel development of the energy exchange market and the corporate PPAs. Will all three systems coexist, or is it already the time to go from the auction scheme to the energy exchange market and the corporate PPAs? These are open questions that are being discussed within the Greek Energy Ministry. Actually, this week there is such a meeting at the ministry trying to give some concrete answers concerning the continuation of the auction scheme or not. Now, for those interested in participating in auctions, there are some pre-qualification criteria, which is you have to have a production license, as it was called until last year. Now it's called a renewable producer certificate, and you have to have a connection agreement or a final grid connection terms offer, both in force. Of course, especially for systems above 1 megawatt, in order to get this final grid connection terms, you need to have an environmental permit. So before participating in auctions, you need to have your project up to a certain degree of maturity. If you are successful in these auctions, then you're given time between 12 and 42 months, depending on the size of your project, in order to construct it and connect it to the system. One of the questions we often get is whether Greek banks are willing to finance such projects in Greece. I must tell you that during the first wave of PV development a few years ago, Greek banks financed practically almost 100% of all PV systems in Greece. But as Greece went through a big financial crisis for the last few years, this is an open question. The good news is that at least the major Greek banks are willing to finance PV. And here are some normal terms for financing. You can get a long-term loan up to 80% of the investment cost. The tenure is 10 to 14 years, depending on the profile of the investor and the size of the system. The interest rate is Euribor plus 3 or 4%, including fees. Of course, bigger companies are now looking for green bonds, which guarantees them even lower rates. And if you take account the current capex and opex in Greece, you can expect an unlevered project IRR of 9 to 10%, and a double-digit IRR for levered projects, which I think it explains why Greece is a key country for investments and why so many people are now looking at the opportunities of the Greek market. Before going to that, I must tell you a major difference we have during this second phase of development. During the first phase of development, we had practically mainly Greek investors and mainly small and medium-sized investments in Greece. Just to give you an idea, up to now, the biggest PV power station in Greece is just 12 megawatts. Currently, the first large-scale utility-scale PV plant is being built in northern Greece. It's a plant of 204 megawatt, which will actually the works will start as of next week, and the Greek Prime Minister will inaugurate this plant, just to send a message that the Greek government believes in PV and they would like to see big projects happening in Greece. Now, Christian, before going to this second part of my presentation, could we have the second poll question, please?
Yes, certainly. I will put it on the screen right now.
Okay. As I said before, we're expecting the EU target model to be introduced in Greece as of next year. That will mean that we will also have the ability to sign corporate PPAs. The real question is what will happen in the next 2 years, and how do you see this new market developing? Do you think that corporate PPAs in Greece in the next 2 years, the development will be trivial, moderate, or strong? Please vote. And think in, okay. That's good to know. Okay. Okay. Let's go back to the presentation, Christian. One other market which is expected in Greece is the PV plus storage market. Unfortunately, up to now, we don't have the appropriate regulations for that. The only regulation for PV plus storage is for small residential and small commercial systems with an inverter of up to 30 kVA, which is, of course, is not enough to boost a new market for that. We are expecting for the new regulatory framework for PV plus storage in the coming months, hopefully early 21. In the meantime, we have a lot of pending applications, hundreds of pending applications for hybrid projects in non-interconnected islands. As you know, Greece has this particular characteristic of having a lot of islands. Many of them are not still connected to the mainland grid. So there are opportunities for hybrid projects. Although, again, the regulatory framework and especially the compensation of these systems is not yet cleared. There are discussions with the EU, and there are a lot of delays. It's a pity because obviously storage especially is the new kid in town, and in the coming years, we expect that this market will be very, very important, and practically it will be very difficult to start building a PV power plant without having a storage system along with that. Now, why I expect that these new free markets will thrive in Greece? As you can see, as you know, Greece has very high wholesale prices just because the market was very concentrated, very shallow, and markets in prices in Greece are often over 60 euros per megawatt hour compared to other European countries. You can see this detail in more detail in these graphs. Considering that the levelized cost of new PV systems in Greece is below 40 euros per megawatt hour, you can imagine that there is a premium for those who decide to participate in the energy exchange market or even participate in corporate PPAs. Of course, this year, during just because of the coronavirus, wholesale prices went down all over Europe, but this is only a matter of time before they are stabilized in higher prices. And at least we have a first signal that if there are some opportunities to participate in energy exchange markets and corporate PPAs, then the Greek market, at least for the years to come, seems to be a very interesting market to participate. Many people coming to Greece for the first time, they always ask if there is a secondary PV market in Greece. Well, last year I would say no, not at all. You would be very lucky if you could find something to be sold. However, there seems that this market is now opening. A few months ago, we had the very first big agreement for the transaction of this 204 megawatt PV power plant, as I was telling before. And considering what's happening with the development of new projects, there are a lot of developers nowadays who aim to build and transfer their PV power plants to interested investors. So yes, in theory, in the coming months, there will be a market for newcomers who would like to acquire an existing and operating PV power plant. However, most of the development is now happening from scratch, and you will see that especially last year we had a boom. Here is this graph shows the applications to the Regulatory Authority for Energy for new PV power plants. As you can see, just in one round, there are up to now there were 4 rounds per year. As of next year, there will be 3 rounds per year. And in just one round, the overall capacity of applications was almost half of the total PV pipeline in Greece from day one. Up to now, we have over 26 gigawatt of potential projects. Of course, this figure is much, much higher than the national target. On the other hand, we know that not all of these projects will be realized. And there is a real fight between developers on who will get the grid connection terms first. Talking about grids, probably this is the biggest bottleneck up to now, especially when it comes to smaller systems connected to the medium voltage. There is a lot of interest for such systems. There are over 5,000 applications for small systems to be connected to medium voltage, and this has created a congestion in certain areas. So probably the best category to be in is bigger systems in the order of 50, 100 or even more megawatts, which are connected to the high voltage with their own substation, and they don't have to be so much worried about congestion. In the meantime, this year was a very interesting year because a lot of legislation changed to the better. Actually, the government realized that they should simplify the authorization process. They have started doing so in May by abolishing the old production license, which took a few years to be issued, with a so-called renewable producer certificate, which is supposed to be much, much easier and much quicker. Also, there were changes in the environmental permitting, which has become leaner and faster, and it's very easy to get a paper, especially for small and medium-sized systems, up to 10 megawatts. Also, for the first time, PV projects are now eligible to participate directly to the wholesale market. Of course, we need to have the EU target model running first before doing that. And one last option is that systems above 250 megawatt can actually apply to the European Commission for the and agree with for a certain feed-in tariff instead of participating in auctions or even in the wholesale market. Obviously, and this is, I think, an international trend, Greece is not a well-known industrial country. We don't produce anymore. We used to PV modules. We don't produce inverters, but we do produce mounting systems, trackers, transformer cables, and telecommunication software and communications equipment needed for the PV employment. But more importantly, we have thousands of people, experienced people and staff with know-how in developing and delivering PV projects. During the period that the Greek market was stagnant, many Greek companies were developing projects abroad, all over the world. So now that the Greek market is live again, obviously we don't have a problem with experienced staff, and this is very good news for any developer who would like to come and invest in Greece. My colleague Christos from Inaxis will explain you a few words on what it means in practice to participate in the Greek PV market. And a message I would like to send is that obviously in every country there are certain problems when one tries to develop a PV project, and every country has their own secrets and peculiarities and whatever. Greece is not an exception. The message is that things are getting better, and we expect that in the coming years, and trying to give some my own answers to the poll questions. The most difficult question would be to ask you what this year's installed capacity will be. To be honest, I have no idea myself. And I have no idea because most of the systems will be connected to the grid during the last couple of months of the year. So the picture we have so far is that only 130 megawatt are installed in 2020. However, this figure could go up to 250, 300, or even 400 megawatts, depending on how many small systems of 500 kilowatts each will be installed by the end of the year. We don't have this picture yet, but we know that, as I said before, we have over 1 gigawatt of PV capacity that has been awarded a feed-in premium. So next year, my guess is that the Greek market will be over half a gigawatt of newly installed capacity, and that's also true for the other 2 or 3 years to follow. Maybe in certain in 22 or 23, we even experience a market closely to 1 gigawatt. Of course, it seems like there is an overheating nowadays in the Greek market, and we know that overheating is never good. You are burnt, and we are trying to find ways to avoid such an overheating and instead guarantee a viable market, a sustainable market for many years to come. As for the second poll question regarding corporate PPAs will start as of next year. However, we need to take into account that any new market always takes some time to develop. I'm not sure that in the next 2 years this market will mature, but certainly if the same question was not for 2 years but 3 or 4 years, yes, in 3 or 4 years this market will be mature, and of course this is what we expect to see. We expect to see subsidy-free projects and totally free market for PV, regardless of the size, regardless of the market segment. Final comment, the future of the Greek PV market is bright, and I would invite any investor from other countries to visit us and see the details and decide to invest in Greece. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Stelios, for the nice presentation. I see there's quite a few questions for you already, but we will wait with those until the end of the webinar, and we will now proceed with Christos' presentation right away. And Christos is the CEO of Inaxis and also one of the co-founders, and he will share a bit more with us on what they are working on with regards to energy trading and such. So Christos, I see you are there already, and we will give you the controls, and I hope it works from your side.
Hi everyone, can I confirm if I can be heard? Christian, is everything okay with the sound and view
yes.
from my side?
Loud and clear.
Good, thanks. So I'm taking the opportunity to move forward from the overview that Stelios provided to go into more practical examples and details of how the target model looks like, what is the difference from the previous system, and what are the opportunities and engagement methods for the PV investors. As Stelios said, we've had very significant traction in the Greek market several years ago. Now several companies starting out of Greece and moved and got active in various global markets. We are one of them. We are essentially a global monitoring and control firm, or actually one of the largest, and we deploy systems in more than 35 to 40 countries. So we are active in this topic by means of extending our monitoring and control platform towards the market coupling. And from that viewpoint, we can speak about the general overview of the market, so give some examples of which projects are supposed to participate in those markets. Go briefly through the typical opportunities offered, and then explain the direct participation option versus indirect participation through RES aggregators, and give some platform examples there so as to see what this participation looks like. So in this slide, I'll try to give briefly an overview of the target model differences in comparison to the pre-existing model of the Greek market, the day-ahead scheduling. Very briefly, the day-ahead scheduling system is essentially a mechanism for submitting the forecast production for the next day, alongside with all the limitations of the rest of the system components. But that's pretty much what it is. So forecast and then some deviation against the actuals. While the target model that is coming online in the next weeks is essentially a complete model that consists of all the modern markets that one expects to find. Typically the day-ahead market that usually consumes the majority of the revenue in the system. Then the intraday bids that are supposed to help investors to correct their positions, and bids optionally in the balancing market when we are managing dispatchable units. This adds potentially extra income, but it's not available for all the generators. Target model, in addition to the three main energy markets, the day-ahead, the intraday, and the balancing market, it also foresees the energy derivatives market. Energy derivatives market is allows for trading of futures and so on, and is connected with the main markets because the derivatives market optionally may include physical delivery of the energy. Then there is also the ability to insert over-the-counter PPAs, which means let's say manually produced agreements that are participating in the market as well. I'll try to explain a bit more of the situation, but in a simplified manner by borrowing some of the slides that are typically used by the energy exchange group when in seminars for promoting the new upcoming model. So typically we see these markets from left to right: the derivatives, the day ahead, the intraday, and the balancing market. Briefly speaking, a typical RES producer is usually participating in the day ahead and the intraday markets. As I mentioned before, balancing market is possible, but only for special areas, special types of assets under some pre-agreed conditions. In order to participate in the markets, we have to respect a number of ontologies here. So again, here I depict the most usual cases, which is a typical market participant addressing the energy exchange and using the NX clear mechanism. but usually not directly, but through some general clearing member that is typically some financial institution. There are also possibilities for direct clearing members and so on, but as a rule of thumb, the most usual participation is the one depicted in this diagram, again courtesy of NX. I'll take an overview here of the projects existing today, which is essentially a sort of a small drill down to what Stelios described before. So we have the following project types: existing projects with feed-in tariff that essentially they don't have an obligation for participation. Existing projects with feed-in tariff that expires after some months or years, which means that these projects, they have the obligation for future participation. Existing or upcoming feed-in premium projects, which is the majority of projects taking place as we speak in the country. So these projects, they require regular participation. And then we have upcoming unsubsidized projects that are not, they don't belong to feed-in tariff or feed-in premium categories, but again, they have to be regular participants in the market. So with the exception of the feed-in tariff projects, all the rest, they have to have some kind of active participation. In terms of project sizes, there are hundreds of projects in the area of 400 kilowatt to 1 megawatt or above. Several projects in the area of 5 to 20 megawatts, and interestingly enough, both larger projects in the area of 20 to 200 megawatts, some examples being the project that Stelios mentioned before, or the upcoming projects announced by the Greek PPCR. And as we hear from the market, there are several projects under development in the range of 250, 300 megawatt, which means very large projects. It's nice to see that large investor groups are looking to the Greek market for developing such large projects that are directly connecting on the high voltage network. So they overcome all the medium voltage limitations that were mentioned before. And they may be looking at the Brussels-based mechanism that may accelerate the approval path. There is also a smaller number of projects that may be participants in the balancing market. Currently, this market is only limited to clear dispatchable assets like thermal assets or hydro assets. In the future, some renewable with batteries or batteries only when they will be fully licensed projects, they will be eligible for participating in the balancing market as well, after, of course, they complete the necessary grid integration and power plant control procedures. I will briefly summarize what are the energy trading opportunities in this new domain. By type of projects, the opportunities are different. For subsidized projects, the opportunities are, let's say, incremental. But for subsidy-free projects, the opportunities are more significant and in some cases mandatory. So subsidized projects in the beginning, first of all, they have to achieve compliance by participating in the market. Otherwise, we're not talking about opportunities, but about costs and penalties. So in the beginning, they need to properly represent themselves on the market, provide the forecasts versus actuals, etc., smooth out their production, compensate for their balancing deviations, etc. They have the opportunity to optimize the market part of the income as opposed to the, let's say, state aid part of the income by achieving closely following the so-called ETA, which is the technology-specific price, the difference between which and the guaranteed price is funded by the public account. So incrementally, there is an interest to optimize that part, the market segment of the income. In addition to that, the subsidized projects can also explore ancillary services when they will be available and fully licensed, but by carefully protecting the core energy offering, which means participating in markets like frequency, voltage, reactive market, and so on and so forth, is okay when it's available, but at the same time, the benefit of participating in this market has to offset the potentially lost energy that would be otherwise be paid with the guaranteed price of the public account. For subsidy-free projects, the first opportunity is obviously to achieve bankability, because subsidy-free projects, they don't have guaranteed price. Greece doesn't have a long tradition of valid PPAs for RES assets. So by participating in the target model, these assets, either directly or through aggregators, they can achieve some predictable cash flows and pricing per megawatt hour and so on. There is a variety of options to achieve that, like participating, of course, in the physical delivery by means of bidding in the day ahead in the intraday markets, by potentially combining that with some futures and derivatives participation, for example, for hedging the forecasted price, and by potentially exploring future addition of extra stuff like batteries or other storage technologies to enable the asset to trade more effectively in the intraday or balancing markets. Typically, the assets of subsidy-free nature, they would be looking for service stacking, i.e. multiple services, ranging from energy production to participation in the small spot market, and also delivering ancillary services or undertaking balancing market dispatch instructions. I would like to take this opportunity to take some feedback from all of you. I'd like to pop up a question here with the assistance of Marco and Christian about what is your anticipated development strategy. We need to understand, are you looking to participate in the tenders mechanism? Are you looking to subsidy-free projects in the short term, or only in the long run, like after 2 or 3 or 4 years? Please take the time to indicate your intention here so that we can understand the strategy you'd like to follow. As discussed before, the participation of the assets that have secured price in the tenders would look for incremental improvements, while the participation of the subsidy-free assets would be necessarily assisted by the target model. So what's the result now? It's very interesting to see that there is so much interest in subsidy-free projects. Yeah, thank you for that. Let us clarify what are the methods for participating. The production units can participate, of course, directly on the market. Every production unit can do that. Typically, this is planned only either by large production units or large production groups, let's say, that possess significant portfolios. The reason for that is that a lot of sophistication is needed, both in human resources and in software platforms. Typically, producers choose an RES aggregator, aggregators being the market players that can group together a number of assets and represent them in the day-ahead or intraday markets. They can use economies of scale to optimize operations, i.e. avoiding having dedicated personnel to provide bids every day, etc. The RES aggregator is doing that on behalf of the market players. If the assets are eligible for RES, for balancing market participation, then typically the aggregator can offer that. And very interestingly, especially for the subsidy-free assets, the aggregators are expected to be able to offer pre-priced PPAs that provide predictable cash flows. The aggregators also cover almost all, depending, of course, on the service package, all of the costs of the participation or of the balancing deviations, which can be surprisingly high and could potentially destroy the incoming cash flows. So definitely there is the need to either address it directly or go through an aggregator in order to protect the inflows and optimize the prices. I would like to use the poll system for a second question, so as to understand what is your trading strategy here. Are you planning to invest in an own trading room, or are you looking to use an RES aggregator, and what is that you are looking for in RES aggregators? Typically, RES aggregators can provide the standard representation and ensure payments, cover all the contractual and compliance, let's say, requirements, but they can also be applicable for players that have appetite for higher risk, like intraday or balancing participation. They can also offer fixed PPAs, or there could be some players among the audience that could be looking for point-to-point PPAs. That again, they need some sort of aggregator to connect the dots, but in reality, the price is established point-to-point. Let's see the results. Okay. Interesting to see that there is a significant appetite for fixed PPAs and for standard representation. That was actually what I was expecting, because it's one thing to want to invest in a market, in a country, and another thing to want to take risk for intraday or balancing or other stuff, or building own trading floor. But it's also interesting to see that there are significant players here that are going to deploy their own trading floor, 18%. Okay, let's move forward. Considerations to take into account when evaluating RES aggregators are the technology and platform capabilities that they can speak for the optimization of their operations. The portfolio size, especially if the PV investor is looking to cover the risk of balancing deviations, because the bigger the portfolio, the less deviations the aggregators have, and the higher the risk that everything will be settled easily and properly. It's important to achieve good integration with the physical part of the RES portfolio for simplification of management. That is easily combining the actuals and the forecasted values. It's very useful to have the ability to cooperate with the aggregator by combining strategies like possibly deciding on a mix of DAM and IDM participations, while typically that would be only for the respondents that mentioned that they would be looking for some higher risk appetite. It is the aggregators that would be looking in order to have small assets participating in the balancing. So they had to have this capability, which is some, let's say, additional flavor on top of the usual market bids and so on, as you have to control the physical side of the asset as well. And it's interesting to see that there are specialized aggregators working on diversified strategies based on the ARIES technology, i.e. wind or hydro or PV and so on. And if you look around the Greek aggregators, there are some of them that are coming direct from the wind side. There are some others that are coming from the hydro side, and so on and so forth. Finally, it's important to see what capabilities for fixed PPAs the RES aggregator has to offer, and whether these can allow the investor to connect somehow to the derivatives market, hedge positions, etc. I'll try to use our platforms in order to give you an understanding of what the coupling between the market interface and the physical interface looks like. So if we assume that there is a typical platform, I'm taking as an example our platform here, but all of your assets, they have some sort of this platform. So typically we have the so-called field and plant level SCADAs, the potentially power plant controllers and RTUs if we are talking about controllable assets. So the yellow, the light green stuff exists almost everywhere. The light purple stuff exists in controllable assets that can participate in the balancing market. Then all of the assets, they have some sort of central monitoring that is the platform that delivers the reports and the actual measurements. And typically this platform is connected with the market integration platform of an aggregator. In our case, the Unity Market Integration extension is available as an add-on on our platform. And the functions is that it interfaces directly on market operators, starting with, Europe-based and Euphemia-based market operators as of now, but also introducing the platform in the UK, in the US, and in Australian markets. The typical action of the platforms is essentially forecasting, energy planning, which is more particular in assets that potentially include storage inside, so as to plan for the day ahead or the intraday market. These functions are essentially leading to the so-called physical optimization algorithms. And then for the rest of the energy part of the aggregation, there is the capability for day ahead and intraday bidding, settlement, which is the resolution of difference between the forecast and the actuals, and then the reporting, which is the creation of the weekly, daily, or monthly reports in order for the circle of forecasting and collection and billing and settlement to be fully documented. I will share with you some observations of the dry runs that are currently taking place. So dry runs of the Hellenic Energy Exchange started at early August, and they continued up to date. It gives reasonable time to the individual players to test and validate the platforms, but more time is needed for the system as a whole, so that the actual forecasts are entered into the system and the actual price clearings have some real sense, because as it was obvious from the first month of operation and according to the formal reports, unfortunately it was not possible to have an alignment between the actual market prices and the dry run prices. However, the system has validated that it can run in volume. We tested with continuous orders insertions. We see realistic but within a box price clearings. We validate that indeed there is a limited depth for IDM auctions, so the day-ahead market works almost as expected. However, the assumption that we will correct our position in the intraday cannot always become true because there is no liquidity in the system. By the way, this is the main reason as to why in the beginning of the target model, all of the systems will be operating as expected, but the balancing fees will not be applied on the participants until we end up with a fully liquid intraday market where the positions can be correctly corrected so that all the coverage of the balancing costs can be fully applied. So in the beginning, the target model will be in full operation with the exception of the charging of the balancing deviations. As an overview, the ordinary trading can be augmented significantly by participating in the IDM and balancing markets. However, this is not something that can come easily. It needs a lot of investment in automation, and that automation, the accuracy, the speed are the key success factors for the market participants. We hope that hopefully the market starts by beginning of November as it is currently planned, and that the numerous assets that are currently participating in the DAS system will start trading on the new target model and participating in all the available markets. Our position in this is that having started from a pure technology perspective.
If you allow me to briefly interrupt, if that's okay with you, since we are sharing the slides afterwards as well with the participants, maybe we can proceed to the Q&A and have people look into your positioning. As I see, we are running a bit over time and there are quite some questions. Is that okay with you?
Yes, actually, that was the end of my presentation. So we are eager to hear the any questions and go into a more live discussion.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for sharing this with us, Christos. I hope Stelios can also then come back on the screen, and then we can handle a couple of questions for both of you. And I think the first one that's I would like to ask to you, Stelios. Dimitris is asking, the RES market operator, DAPEP, if I pronounce correctly, projects a considerable shortfall in the special account for renewables at the end of the year, 225 million. In your view, what measures need to be taken by the Greek authorities in order to address this issue or this shortage in the fund? Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, this is a well-known problem, and what I can say is that the Energy Ministry is thinking about that very seriously. Obviously, that would be a very bad sign to go back to the bad days of the PEP. And there is a plan, which I don't know if it will prevail or not, but what the government wants to avoid, especially during these difficult times of the coronavirus and the consequent economic crisis, they wouldn't like consumers to pay more. In order to avoid that, the fees that consumers pay, the charges that consumers pay now for renewable energy, this is a separate amount which everybody can see in their accounts. The idea is to integrate this amount of money needed for the balancing of the DAPEP RES account, so that the providers of electricity actually pay for this as an energy cost, so that after all, I mean, there are a lot of details to be resolved and a lot of legislation needed to overcome this, but the overall result would be to make sure that the RES account would be balanced and that the support, the state support for renewables is incorporated in the energy cost for energy providers. This is more or less the framework that the government is working on. Of course, this is not the only option. According to existing legislation, if the RES account has a deficit, the law says that consumers should pay more and balance it. But as I said before, this is a difficult political decision.
But the fund is the money in the fund is brought in by residential consumers, or?
It is. There are a lot of sources. Residential consumers pay a considerable amount of this. Also, this fund gets money from CO2 credits. And now the good news is that CO2 prices have gone up again. So this deficit will become less than the original projection. However, it is obvious that we cannot go back. Up to now, the PEP is paying quite regularly, and discussing with them, I realized that they do their best to continue like that. Of course, when you're talking about millions, you need some political intervention, and we are expecting this intervention by the Energy Ministry.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, hopefully the issue can be addressed in like a fair way with multiple solutions of maybe new revenue streams. I have a question for Christos here as well. What is the real market risk undertaken by the RES aggregators? Do they cover market operators' payment failure or even delays in payment as well?
Currently, the RES aggregators essentially resell the energy towards the market. So they don't take, let's say, credit risk as the suppliers would. However, there is, yes, a significant possibility for undertaking risk if the forecasts are consistently off on the negative side, let's say. So there is a huge deficit between the forecasted and the actual energy. It could be that there are no penalties for that, but you might find your portfolio being considerably delaying, let's say, expressed in hundreds of thousands of euros, if you consistently forecast less and you are producing more. So in theory, you will be compensated, but it's not something that is implemented automatically at the end of the month for various reasons. So the fact that the penalties are not applied does not mean that it's a free ride. If you fall out significantly, then you create a very large cash flow delay for yourself. And depending on the situations, there are agreements that would see the owner bearing that delay or the aggregator bearing that delay. This is not regulated. It's something between the RES aggregators and the RES producers themselves.
Okay, thank you. We can cover maybe one or two additional questions. There's maybe I can pull them together because there are two questions with regards to the grid. The first one is there any news on the Peloponnese saturated grid network and if the limit will be lifted soon? And also if you have any ideas which areas in Greece are still available currently for connection terms. So in that specific region, but also in general in Greece, what is the best possible area for grid connections?
Peloponnese has been saturated for many years, and there is a waiting list of a few hundred of megawatts that are waiting for grid connection offers. So there is a priority list, let's say. Currently, they have to finish with this list first before they open new grid space, grid capacity. There are some delays. And the reason is that although the major high voltage lines have been constructed, the whole project has been sent to the High Court. We're expecting a decision from that. Once this is resolved, we expect that next year the grid will be ready to accept new applications for a few hundred of extra megawatts. And a couple of years later, when extra lines are will be constructed in Peloponnese, I think that the problem will be resolved for good, because there will not be any bottlenecks in the area. As to which areas are still available, that's a very good question. I would suggest that one plays the lotto instead of answering this question, because there is they have more chances to get some money. Just joking, but the truth is that more and more areas are becoming congested these days, because there are thousands of applications. To be honest, nobody was ready to accept so many applications. Of course, we have made, as an association, we have made many proposals on how to deal with that and how to open new grid space and capacity. But obviously, this will take some time. We haven't agreed yet on which strategies to follow. However, there are technical solutions that could increase the existing grid capacity in many areas of the country. And if there is strong political will, I think that in the next couple of years, we can see some solutions taking place. Yeah. But as I said before, medium voltage it becomes more and more problematic. That's why we see so many applications for the high voltage. By the way, there was a recent legislation which gives an opportunity for small producers to be united and aggregate many small projects in order to be able to construct a high voltage substation and then be able to be connected to the high voltage instead of medium voltage. That was not possible, I mean, from a regulation point of view, but now this is resolved with new legislation.
Okay, so you expect projects with a direct high voltage connection in the upcoming period? Because in the Peloponnese region, the bottleneck was also in the medium voltage grid or the high voltage?
It was everywhere, including low voltage, although there is a capacity which is given for Peloponnese, especially for self-consumption, small self-consumption systems and energy communities. There is a capacity of around 50 megawatt that was given, especially for this kind of projects, but not the regular feed-in premium projects that most investors would be interested in.
Okay, thanks for that, Stelios. Well, unfortunately, we have to round off already since we are a bit over time, although we have quite some questions left. So I suggest you contact Christos or Stelios privately, or of course, we hope to see you in Athens, where they will probably also both attend, if I'm correct. So for now, this will be the end of this webinar. Gentlemen, thanks for both of your presentations, and the audience as well. Thanks a lot for tuning in this afternoon and asking your question. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And as said before, the recordings and the slides will be available on the website and on our YouTube channel pretty soon. And make sure to subscribe for updates on the website or register right away for the event. And in the upcoming months, we also have several other exciting events coming up, such as our Solar Asset Management Europe conference in Frankfurt, but also Solar Market Parity Italy, Solar Future France, or our global International Floating Solar Conference in Amsterdam. And of course, the Solar Future Greece on November 19. And there are also still opportunities to get involved in the Greek event. So please reach out to me to discuss this further and explore the ways of getting involved if you're interested. And thank you very much for joining today. And I'm looking forward to meet you in Athens at the end of November. Bye, Stelios. Bye, Christos.
Bye.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Stelios, and thanks to the audience. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.